As is our custom, we will begin with a moment of silent reflection. Mrs. Galante, would you call the roll?
Mr. Giroux?
Here.
Mr. Croner?
Here.
Mr. Meyer?
Sorry, here.
Mrs. Muehlfeld? Here. Mrs. Randall?
Here.
Mrs. Weber?
Here.
Mrs. Fee?
Here. We begin our meetings with an opportunity for public comment on non-agenda items. If there's anyone present who would like to make a comment on an item not on tonight's agenda, please approach the microphone and state your name and address prior to making your comment. Seeing none, we will move to approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items which board members would like to have removed from the consent agenda for separate discussion or action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Randall. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Muehlfeld. Is there any discussion? Please leave that door open. This is an open meeting and the door needs to remain open. Thank you. Is there any community comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, Mrs. Galante, would you call the roll?
Mr. Giroux?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes. That brings us to our action item of school board officer election. Dr. Ertl?
Thank you. According to School Board Policy 0150, school board officers will be nominated and elected in the following order: President, Vice President, Treasurer, and Clerk. Paper ballots have been prepared to be used in the nomination and election process. Board members are listed alphabetically on the ballots. Per board policy, the President and Vice President are not eligible for more than 2 consecutive one-year terms. President Fee has served 2 terms as president and therefore is not eligible for another term. Her name has been removed from the ballot for the nomination and vote of president. And we'll begin with the nomination for president.
Goes one way, goes the other way. So, okay, all right, very good.
Nominated for president are Mrs. Randall, Mr. Croner, Mr. Meyer, Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Muehlfeld, so we will now do the vote for president. And everyone but Mr. Giroux. So Mr. Croner, Mr. Meyer, Mrs. Muehlfeld, Mrs. Randall, and Mrs. Weber.
Dr. Ertl did not read.
I didn't read all the, if you're nominated, so I
Thank
only
you.
read if, just for nominations. For the vote, I will read all the votes.
Got it. Thank you.
For the votes, Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Muehlfeld, Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Randall, Mr. Meyer, Mr. Croner. No one received 4 votes, so we will do a second vote.
Hang of this now.
On the second vote, Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Muehlfeld, Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Weber, Mr. Meyer, Mrs. Randall, and Mr. Croner. No one received 4 votes. We'll do a third vote.
Thank you.
On the third vote, Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Muehlfeld, Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Weber, Mr. Meyer, Mrs. Weber, Mr. Meyer. Mrs. Weber received 4 votes and will be recommended for president. Next is the nomination for vice president. And nominated for vice president, Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Muehlfeld, Mr. Meyer, Mrs. Fee, so nominated are Mrs. Fee, Mr. Meyer, Mrs. Muehlfeld, and Mrs. Randall. Now this is for the vote for vice president.
Thank you.
Do board members need clarification as to who is nominated for this position?
Yes, maybe you should just read it once more.
Mrs. Fee, Mr. Meyer, Mrs. Muehlfeld, and Mrs. Randall. vote for Vice President. Mrs. Randall? Mrs. Muehlfeld? Mr. Meyer? Mrs. Fee? Mr. Meyer? Mr. Meyer? Mrs. Fee? No one has received 4 votes. We'll do a second vote for Vice President.
I think we're one short.
One
We got 2 ballots.
Extra one.
That's what it is.
The second vote, Mr. Meyer? Mrs. Muehlfeld? Mr. Meyer? Mrs. Fee? Mr. Meyer? Mrs. Fee? Mr. Meyer? Mr. Meyer received 4 votes and will be recommended for Vice President. Nominations for Treasurer. Nominations for Treasurer, Mr. Croner. Mrs. Muehlfeld. Mrs. Fee. Mrs. Randall. So nominations, or people that were nominated, Mrs. Fee, Mr. Croner, Mrs. Muehlfeld, and Mrs. Randall. And now the vote for treasurer. I think we might have extra.
I feel like I'm in 2nd grade.
And votes for treasurer, Mr. Croner. Mr. Croner. Mrs. Fee. Mrs. Muehlfeld. Mrs. Randall. Mrs. Randall. Mr. Croner. No one has received 4 votes, so we'll do another vote for treasurer. The second vote for treasurer, Mrs. Randall. Mr. Croner. Mrs. Randall. Mr. Croner. Mr. Croner. Mr. Croner. Mr. Croner. Mr. Croner will be recommended for treasurer. Nominations for clerk. Nominations for clerk. Mrs. Randall. Mrs. Muehlfeld. Mrs. Fee. Mr. Gerose. Nominated for clerk, Mrs. Fee, Mr. Gerose, Mrs. Muehlfeld, and Mrs. Randall. And now the vote is for clerk. And for clerk, Mrs. Muehlfeld, Mrs. Fee, Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Randall, Mr. Gerose, Mrs. Fee, Mrs. Randall. No one has received 4 votes. We'll vote again. The second vote for clerk, Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Fee, Mrs. Fee, Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Randall. And Mrs. Randall will be recommended for clerk.
Mr. Gerose, would you please read items 1 and 2 do you have notations as to who has won each of the positions?
Sure. Just,
Can we vote separately on the officers?
Certainly. Why don't you just read number 1?
say President Lois Weber?
Please start with, it is recommended.
Oh, it is
and-
recommended that the following person be elected officers of the Wauwatosa School Board. in accordance with policy 0150 for a term beginning tonight and ending in May 2012. For president, we have Lois Weber. Vice President, Mike Meyer. Treasurer, Phil Croner. Clerk, Mary Jo Randall. Appointment of secretary.
It's been requested that we deal with them separately, but at the conclusion, you would need to add, and I so move.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Croner. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Galante, would you call the roll?
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant individual officers.
It's not customarily done that way. Is there a reason that you need to proceed in that manner?
Yeah.
I'll second the request.
All right, the motion then will have to be restated to simply start with president. And it'll have to be read separately please read it separately for each officer,
Mrs. Fee?
starting with president.
Point of order, if Mr. Meyer seconded this request, do we need a vote on this motion?
It's not technically a motion, it's a request for a change of procedure. Frankly, I don't want to get bogged down in this, and I think we should just proceed. Since 2 members have requested it, let's simply proceed in that manner.
It is recommended that the following person be elected officer of the Wauwatosa School Board in accordance with policy 0150 for a term beginning tonight and ending in May 2012. Lois Weber has been nominated for president. I so move.
Mr. Croner, do you maintain your second?
Yes.
Mrs. Galante, would you call the roll?
Mr. Gerose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes. Now, would you please read the same for vice president?
I'll get this down by the time we're done. It is recommended that the following persons be elected officers of the Wauwatosa School Board in accordance with policy 0150 for a term beginning tonight and ending May 2012. For vice president, we have Mike Meyer. I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Galante, would you call the roll?
Mr. Gerose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes. For treasurer, please.
It is recommended that the following persons be elected officers of the Wauwatosa School Board in accordance with policy 0150 for a term beginning tonight and ending in May 2012. For treasurer, we have Phil Croner. I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Muehlfeld. Mrs. Galante, would you call the roll?
Mr. Gerose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
No, and I would just like to explain.
Sorry, this is a vote. There's not the time for statements or commentary. If your vote is no, that's what we're here doing at this time.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes.
And Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
It is recommended that the following persons be elected officers of the Wauwatosa School Board in accordance with policy 0150 for a term beginning tonight and ending in May 2012. For clerk, we have Mary Jo Randall. I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Muehlfeld. Mrs. Galante, would you call the roll?
Mr. Gerose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes. Now would you read number 2, please?
Appointment of Secretary of the Board. It is recommended that the superintendent be appointed to act as Secretary of the Board. I so move.
Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Croner. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Galante, would you call the roll?
Mr. Gerose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes. Congratulations to the new officers. Mrs. Weber, I now cede the chair to you.
Excuse me, would you like to continue with the meeting? You've worked with Dr. Earl on the agenda.
That's
and
quite all right.
I would be very pleased if you would continue.
If, I'm not certain that that's appropriate for protocol, I don't think I can.
Okay.
So I appreciate the offer,
Okay,
but I will cede the chair.
thank you. Okay, if I leave my stuff under here.
Yes.
Before we proceed with the agenda, I would just like to commend Mrs. Fee for the last 2 years as her leadership role. We've been, I think, a board that has operated very successfully, and I know it's a great deal of it is due to Mrs. Fee. So thank you.
Thank you.
If we may move to student learning, please, Mrs. Mufeld.
Thank you. There are 2 items under student learning. It is recommended that the school board approve the resource proposal for advanced placement world language classes with a cost of approximately $60,000 for the resources and approximately $6,500 for the AP workshop training as presented and discussed at the April 25th meeting. It is also recommended that the school board approve the attached lists of prospective graduates from Wauwatosa East and Wauwatosa West High Schools with the understanding that students will complete all high school graduation requirements, and I so move.
Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mrs. Fee. Is there discussion? Seeing none, is there any community comment? Seeing none, would you call the, excuse me, Mrs. Fee, I think we have to have discussion first on this item, don't we, before we take the vote?
There was a request for discussion and there was none, so I believe
Okay,
that.
so that's from the audience, so.
And you requested community comment and there wasn't any, so I believe we can proceed with the
Okay,
vote.
thank you. Mrs. Galante, please?
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. DeRose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes. Thank you. Superintendent's report, please.
Cooperative
Thank you, Mr. Croner.
Cooperative Educational Service Agency Number 1 Delegate. It is recommended that the school board approve the appointment of board member Sharon Muehlfeld as district representative to the Cooperative Educational Service Agency Number 1, CESA Number 1. This appointment includes attending the annual convention to be held on Tuesday, May 17th, 2011, and I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there any discussion? Okay, is there any community comment, please, on this motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Galante?
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. DeRose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Muehlfeld. You've served, is this your 4th term with the, serving for CESA?
I think I'm going to be starting my 7th year.
Oh, my goodness, okay, well,
So as your CESA 1 board rep, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
doing a good job, thank you. Reports to the board, please. Elementary Social Studies Resources. You want to introduce that first?
Mrs. Ehrenberger is here with some others, and she will go right ahead.
As you begin, would you introduce your panel?
Good evening. I have with me this evening for the elementary social studies proposal. I have Nan Glaser, a fifth grade teacher from McKinley Elementary. I have June Paulus, our gifted and talented coordinator, and Bill Anderson, supervisor of student learning. We have been working this year for our curriculum. We've been working this year for the curriculum council schedule that we would review our elementary social studies. So we began earlier this year with a committee made up of several members. I won't take the time to recognize all of them now, but we had several people that were very dedicated across all grade levels and across all schools, and some of them were district representation. So throughout the year, we met to do our review of elementary social studies. We met, our main meetings were October 14th, February 15th, April 21st. We had several subcommittee meetings that conducted some of the work that was for the larger meetings to review and proceed on. We also visited some other programs and conducted some pilots, and we went to the Curriculum Council on April 26th for review of our proposal. So the committee this year conducted a survey with all staff. We realigned our benchmarks to state and national standards. We rewrote benchmarks to make them student-friendly. I know you've got a copy of the brochure that we used so that we could articulate them across grade levels. And it's hard for you to imagine the previous documents, which were much more extensive, but our committee did a really good job of scaling those down to the essentials to make them more friendly for both student use, parent use, and teacher use. Then what we did is we created teacher descriptions for those benchmarks that provide teachers more information in order to be able to make sure we have a common understanding of what the benchmark is addressing. We also piloted material and we visited the Wanakee program. The Wanakee program is where they teach social studies in Spanish. A large majority of our committee members went on a visit at one time during the year. We had several different opportunities. And then we investigated and selected a resource. When we conducted the survey, there are several things that we felt came up in relation to what needed to be addressed. We know that consistency was a concern and an issue. Consistency in what was taught and what resources were used. The benchmarks we knew needed to be revised. There will be a new Common Core for social studies. However, we consulted with the Department of Public Instruction throughout the process. Those Common Core for social studies will not be out for several years. We were put on the track of understanding that the National Social Studies Council was our best advice for us to look at their requirements, and also for us to understand that concepts were going to be emphasized more than content in the new Common Core. So while they couldn't give us any explicit guidance, we could at least get some ideas of what direction we thought that Common Core would end up going. We also had feedback that we needed our curriculum to be developmental. So in other words, that it connected from one year to the next and built off of, each year built off the previous year. Fifth grade was overwhelmed with content. It seemed like we kind of waited, and fifth grade got hit with a lot of what was needing to be taught. All grade levels needed resources. In a minute, I'll show you the variety of resources that are currently being used in the district. How there was no way with our current resources and support that we could access our technology on any kind of regular basis to deliver that curriculum. We needed to look at best practice. Everyone agreed that students really enjoy social studies, that it's a content area that we probably could really enhance for our students and have a huge impact. We also needed to consider the World Language Initiative and how it might fit into the social studies curriculum. 90% of teachers preferred some type of program that was either comprehensive or had some type of standardized resources. And it was acknowledged that Treasures has social studies nonfiction reading also, our English language arts purchase. This is an example of our current resources that are used across the district, and this is probably a small list. In 2004, the elementary social studies teachers undertook an adoption, and what happened was they went through the process, but at the end, evidently, an adoption did not take place. So this particular part of our curriculum hadn't been updated for quite some time. I think that Leanne, being a teacher here, can tell you about what some of those U.S. history textbooks look like, but there, you can just see that there's like a variety of different things that are used. We had teachers come to the committee work with different geography resources, different companies. They're really operating a lot out of, whatever they have or whatever they could find they were using. So that really did not provide any consistency or equity for our students. We, as a consultant, we had Doug Buell. Doug Buell is he was a social studies teacher for over 30 years, but he is also a lead consultant, not just in Wisconsin, even though he's from Wisconsin, he's from Madison, but he's also across the United States and internationally. He was the president of the International Reading Association at one time, and his area, he is also a licensed reading specialist, and his area is about literacy and the content. And so Doug came and worked with our committee on developing readers, writers, and thinkers in social studies. So he spent time with us understanding what that shift in thinking is. We also consulted with the Department of Public Instruction, the National Social Studies Council, and then also looked at what other districts were doing, even though I can tell you that social studies across other districts, many of them are in the same place that we're at, and if we're able to do what we're proposing tonight, I think it'll put us in a position to provide leadership in this area. We reviewed several resources. There's only about 5 major resources that are even available for review. We looked at Scott Forsman Pearson, we looked at McGraw-Hill, we looked at Teachers Curriculum Institute, Social Studies Alive, the Wisconsin Historical Society, which is only a 4th grade curriculum, and we also looked at Sea to Shining Sea Wisconsin, which is also only a 4th grade resource. The recommended resource that we propose to you is TCI Social Studies Alive. It aligns to both the national and the state standards. You can see that in kindergarten, the main topic is Me and My World. Grade 1 is My School and Family. Grade 2, My Community. Grade 3, Our Community and Beyond. Grade 4 is Regions of Our Country, and specific to our state, that would be supplemented with Wisconsin history. There are some resources here that are free or at very minimal cost that we can supplement with. And at grade 5, it's America's Past, so U.S. history. The rationale, it was a unanimous decision. The committee was very supportive of this. I think when you hear Leanne talk in a few minutes, you'll see that this is something that's very exciting, not just for teachers, but for students as well. Leanne spent the last 3 months doing the most extensive pilot that we had done in the district, so that's why I've asked her to speak to this. It's a new approach to teaching social studies. It's very interactive. It's high student engagement. It makes connections for students to their lives, meaningfulness. It emphasizes critical thinking. It's a way of teaching as much as it is about what is taught. TCI will say that if you do not teach the way that this curriculum is designed, then you're really not teaching what you're supposed to be doing, because it's really about making history and social studies come off the page and be alive for students. The lessons are fully developed. So one of the things that teachers liked, they're very teacher-friendly, easy to implement. They are also, TCI is a company that only works in social studies. They do no other content areas. They are owned by former social studies teachers. Their trainers are social studies teachers, and it's the only specialty that they have. And it also has some extensive and interesting ways to look at formative and summative assessments, that it's not just all multiple choice, but there's like some very creative ways to assess students and look at skills and concepts. The research that supports this particular curriculum is the National Social Studies Council. It also is based off multiple intelligences work. So that's where the engagement and the interactive part is emphasized. So there are visual connections in this curriculum. There are kinesthetic, music and rhythm is used. It's interpersonal and interpersonal, logical and mathematical. All of those are engaged in this curriculum. They also use the work of Elizabeth Cohen on mixed ability groups for cooperative learning. This curriculum is built off that children working together and interacting with each other is much more, enhances the learning for the students. The spiral of the curriculum is based on understanding that the curriculum should be progressive and developmental, and that it should spiral back and reinforce, but it should build on, from year to year, it should build on what was taught previously. Wiggins and McTighe are understanding by design, so it's learning to plan backwards. You start with the big ideas, and then you work your way back. That is the approach that they use in designing this curriculum. And non-linguistic representation, which is heavily studied by Robert Marzano, where movement and graphic organizers, mental images are all part of the curriculum development. It supports all learners. It uses a considerate text. A considerate text is one that is carefully structured so that it meets the needs of all learners, things that we might not think about, but a considerate text does not use 2 columns. It uses pictures, but it's not just pictures for picture's sake, but they're extremely selected pictures so that students aren't also overwhelmed or not overstimulated. So they have considered lots of the placement and layout so that it's user-friendly for all learners. The multiple intelligences that is used is actually largely to engage all the different types of learners. Each lesson, not each unit, but each lesson has differentiation for enrichment, for support for students. There's auditory books. The textbook is auditory for students that need it. There's a lot of ELL. Actually, the thing that I don't have on here is there is a Spanish version of everything that they have as well. So any of these resources come in Spanish. And it's very technology-based, and it's cutting-edge technology. We saw some things that we haven't been able to see before that they use to engage students in the learning. Everything is online, so you get both hard copy and web-based resources. Junior kindergarten, it's very difficult to find social studies resources. They looked at several things, and they feel that in Treasures, they don't get to use all of Treasures because they don't have the students as long as the curriculum is designed, for many more lessons that are there. So they looked at the Treasures alignment and looked for the expository readings that may be aligned to social studies topics. And what they are proposing that they'd like to do is to enhance some of those topics with manipulatives and some other engaging kinds of resources. So they studied and looked at some things that might be able to enhance those topics that are already present in their curriculum. They also felt that after they had a chance to work with kindergarten next year, they could see if there's some lessons there that JK could possibly adopt or transition with, that if kindergarten wasn't going to use them all. The cost is for SK through 5. That includes both having the hard copy or online access. Any updates during the adoption, so during the time that we have TCI, if there's updates, we automatically get them, is $163,432.80. That is based on some numbers that the cost could be reduced further. We have looked at the possibility of having some team teaching. So some teachers might specialize in social studies at a grade level, and some teachers may choose science or a different area, so that we could not just for cost savings, but also to provide an opportunity for teachers to have areas of concentration that may be more suitable for them. We found that that's possible at some grade levels in some schools, but it's very difficult to do that across the board to schedule at this time. The SK would be $6,000. The implementation plan would be, if we were to get this approved, that we would have an initial training on June 20th. We would use a trainer model. I have 2 people sitting with me tonight that are both outstanding. I know the TCI representative was extremely impressed with both of these individuals and said he is very comfortable with us being able to have some trainers in-house and then be able to have them available so we can be more flexibly train teachers when it might be best for them. Some teachers may want to be, some teachers that are on the committee want to be trained early. Other teachers, are looking more toward closer to the school year. So we'd have some flexibility built in if we could do that. Considering grade level teaming, we've asked the principals to already begin to look at that where it is possible. We would do some summer curriculum work. This would be especially in 3rd and 4th grade. In 3rd grade, we have a lot of, we think that we can enhance 3rd grade by, with some materials about Wauwatosa. They study the community, so we can find some things online that we can support the 3rd grade TCI curriculum. And the same thing would be true for 4th grade as well. Looking at the training would be focused on the pedagogy, that we also understand how to teach this, not just what's on the page, but how do we actually approach the teaching of this particular curriculum. Some evaluation is, looking at our WKC scores and social studies. It would certainly be nice to see some continuous improvement in this area. We know that we can stabilize the minutes taught, and we think we'll get teachers more engaged now that we could have something that would be more easily accessible for them. We know that the minutes were very inconsistent, across grade levels, across schools. The committee would reconvene next year to look at how things are going and to address what concerns we have. We do feel that this is a very user-friendly resource. So there's built-in assessments as well into this curriculum that are both formative and summative that we would use during our professional learning community time to assess where our students are at in relation to what they're learning. And I'm going to let Leanne just talk a little bit about her pilot experience, because I think that'll also give you some insight into how the curriculum is really different than something that we've had in the past.
Thank you so much for letting me share my experience with you. It has been awesome the last 3 months of piloting. We're on our 4th unit now of TCI. Just to let you know how easy it is to plan and deliver, we had our TCI rep that came on Tuesday and introduced it to us, and I went home that night thinking I wanted to try it. And by Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock, customer service opened up. I had my password, a 3-year free program to start it off, and by Thursday morning, I began the units. So it was just diving into it. I was so excited to get the kids into it. What I really liked about it is that units are about maybe 2 to 3 weeks long. They're very focused on a specific skill and a specific content that they're studying. The kids aren't overwhelmed with a lot of other things that are thrown to them. When we're able to assess them, it's easy to assess if they were able to get the main point or the main concept of the units. The daily plans are outlined very easily for the teacher to look at and do their daily or weekly plans. Some lessons are maybe 25 minutes, which are great for the teacher that has to cram it kind of into the day and find the time to teach it. Other lessons are maybe 45 minutes. So again, there's opportunities throughout the day to deliver your lessons. There's opportunities to slow down a little bit and focus on some topics. Within the beginning of each lesson for the teachers, they have their learning targets, which I really like, their main question or their main focus that comes up all the time for the kids so that they really understand what is the question they're being asked. They also give aggressive verbs or skills that they really are focusing on, if it is researching, if it's doing a Venn diagram, if it's debating an issue. They also bring in reading strategies. The neat one that we were doing, they had to go back into reading and find 3 opportunities that was a dilemma for slaves during their time. They recommended using Post-its when they went back. So in the teacher's manual, they tie in what is appropriate reading strategies for that grade level. In addition, they tie in lots of writing opportunities for the kids to form their answers and to relay it back to us teachers. Their units are structured, so it's very familiar to the students. So after you kind of do one unit, you kind of know what the expectation is. They always start out with an excellent preview to tie in prior knowledge. One of the units I taught was on slavery, and the main theme was understanding what the word dilemma was and what a tough dilemma West African slaves went through. And they had the kids think of a dilemma they went through in their life, and we really pulled it apart and looked at A dilemma is not an easy choice either side. You're not going to have a good choice to make. And they really understood it for 10-year-olds to bring in some real life experiences, whether it was with their family or brothers or sisters or friends, and really understand that concept of dilemma so they could take that into history on what they were learning. Each unit has a set of vocabulary words to learn, and they have excellent resources, different graphic organizers, different activities on how to understand the vocabulary within the content of what's being taught. Then there's several readings, and each reading has an excellent graphic organizer or some kind of note or activity for the kids to do. It's really important to understand that the activities were actually created first, and then the reading was created to supplement the activity. So it's very, as Beth was talking, the textbook is reader-friendly so that all students wouldn't be left behind. And the reading, again, doesn't have a lot of fluff. It's what they need to get the activity done and to understand the main concept or learning targets. Every activity, the kids are out of their seats. They never sit still. They're either up at the board, they're acting something out. For instance, on the slavery issue, we drew out little boats on the floor with masking tape, and they actually had to get in there and squish themselves and relive what it would have been like to be on a boat during that time. They also had to act some pictures from Jamestown and Roanoke out and kind of stand a pose and ask and interview questions about what was going through their head during this time. And all the information that they got was based on their reading. So there's a lot of opportunities for the informal assessing whether they understand the concept or not. There's always a reading further opportunity where they take the concept that's being taught and they apply it to today. For instance, on the slavery unit, we were able to listen to some old spiritual songs and listen to how they passed down their stories and how it kept them going and not giving up, and we're able to go online and listen to some of those songs through the program. And their assessments are wonderful. It's a very short multiple choice, but in addition they have maybe looking at a map and interpreting the map, interpreting some kind of picture and what's going on, and there's also a writing connection to it. The best part of this program, as Beth said, is the online resources and the tools. Everything that a teacher would need is right at their fingertips. They could get it at home or they could get it at school. They have lots of arts, music, maps. I was able to go on to YouTube and bring up some pictures of Jamestown and Roanoke and listen to the old spiritual songs. There's reading challenges and games. Everything is interactive on the smartboard. So the kids are up out of their seats using the smartboard. One of the best things is a PowerPoint presentation for each unit. So the teacher never has to walk around with a teacher's manual or teacher's edition. They have created through a PowerPoint presentation that brings up the slides and the pictures that they need to see, the directions. It might bring up the work that they're expected to do. In addition, you can bring up the textbook. So when you're reading with your students, you can bring the textbook up. You can use the highlighter. You can focus in on pictures. You can focus in on maps. Again, it's very interactive. And they have an excellent tutorial where the kids can practice assessment questions, and they get a variety going through the multiple intelligences. A lot of enrichment opportunities to go on and get different activities for the kids. And I believe it really meets the needs of all kids, those that need to differentiate and to think above and beyond. I think the activities are built with the opportunity for children to challenge themselves and to go beyond what maybe the expectation is. And I think it's also simple enough that every child would be successful with the text and the activity built in within the within the unit itself.
Jean, did you want to talk about
Well, one of the things I love about the program is I've been doing staff development in this district for more years than I care to count. But what I found so interesting is, for example, one class that I taught in the district was a class called Classroom Instruction That Works. And it's based on a book by Robert Marzano, a leading researcher, where he identifies the most effective strategies for teachers to use as they teach content that improves student achievement. And I worked with teachers over many years to implement those strategies, such as compare and contrast and graphic organizers and things like that. I've worked with teachers on multiple intelligences and how to take multiple intelligences and integrate those into their lessons. I've worked with teachers on writing essential questions for units that they teach and focusing on those with their students. And what amazed me when we came across this program is that it does all of those things. Teachers don't have to spend hours and hours to integrate those things. They're already there, they're part of the program, and it's very, like you said, interactive for children. One of the other things that I looked at was how it differentiates for different levels of learners. And one of the things that I loved is it's very open-ended, so that when children are doing activities, there's very general questions, and kids can come into those questions with whatever background knowledge they possess. So those were things that I found to be really valuable in this program.
We tried to recruit middle school and high school teachers for our committee, and we did have 2 high school teachers that stuck it out with us, and both of them are very excited about the program for elementary and would like to be excited for it for themselves too. But they have like the free trials, but they were like very impressed, very, I think, excited to see that there was something like this out there. So that's my, in conclusion, I just want to say that the materials are on display in the Student Learning Office. You can also access an overview of materials at www.teachtci.com. So we actually had a representative from TCI present to the Curriculum Council so they could get a very in-depth look at exactly what the program was. Curriculum Council was extremely excited. I've actually had follow-up from Curriculum Council members since the meeting that are looking, that have excitedly looked into the resource further and have made some requests to connect the resource in some other ways in their own personal, professional things that they do. So it was pretty exciting for them as well.
Mr. Anderson, would you like to comment and add anything?
Well, I just to echo, the beauty of this program is its simplicity, yet its power to engage students. And so I think what we all learned through the process is that this particular product, this resource, is really going to help to shift how we deliver our lessons and really open our eyes. As Jean said, she's been working in a district and staff development for years on the research-based things we're after with kids, and this program delivers that. And it does it in a way that is just right and easy for teachers to utilize. So it's a very powerful program.
Thank you. Board members, questions, comments? Mrs. Randall?
Beth, you talked just a little bit about the Spanish, and I see at the end here it said it has a full Spanish immersion version of the program. Is that work being done currently, the Spanish curriculum
The
development?
Spanish curriculum is not currently being done. It will start shortly. We have, one of the things we needed to be able to do that work is we really needed clearly articulated standards and benchmarks for us to be able to even look at that part from a Spanish perspective. We have looked, however, we have been looking at Spanish, the development of the Spanish curriculum, and have had some conversations with some of the individuals we're recommending for those positions. And developmentally, this program has a lot to it, and there's different way, it gives flexibility for how we can complement. Certainly you can see that some of the topics in the social studies benchmarks are going to lend themselves much easier to the Spanish teacher, things that are about culture and regions. And so if they're studying regions, they can look at the regions that are Spanish speaking. So they'll have lots of different ways that they can have some inroads with social studies curriculum. But at the same time, especially as we develop language for children, we cannot leave children behind with social studies curriculum, because the sophistication of social studies, vocabulary, and teaching history and those things will develop over time as students can develop their language skills. But here initially, in the first, second, and third year of implementation, there will be some of the more simpler concepts that we'll be able to support with Spanish, but the complexity of much of this will still need to be delivered by the classroom teacher. So our Spanish teachers will definitely now have a very clearly articulated set of benchmarks to help them look to see how they can support the social studies curriculum. And if there's chances for them to do some replacement, they certainly can. We had the committee go to Wanakee. Almost everyone on the committee went. The feedback from the committee overwhelmingly was positive, and they were very excited. They could see very clearly that we can't, in year one, we cannot teach all social studies curriculum in Spanish because certainly our students wouldn't have the skills to be able, the language skills to be able to do that. But they definitely see where some of those connections are at.
And that's still the intent, is to primarily use the social studies as the area for implementing the Spanish?
Where we can and where it seems appropriate, and as it evolves, yes. It's just that there's so many natural links for social studies, but there are some natural links with other content as well, and some parts of it are just learning the language. So as we develop that curriculum, I think we're going to see a combination of language development, social studies links, possibly even some science, as we look at it. But initially, it's going to be more of a supporting role than it can be just the entire curriculum.
Okay.
Schaumburg School District in Illinois, a very large district, recently adopted TCI because of the fact that it's Spanish and English, and because they have several elementary schools that are bilingual. So they saw that as a benefit to the program. For us right now, the materials will be too sophisticated in terms of the Spanish language for our students to be able to pick them up and use them. But that's available to us at no cost to be able to use anything, any Spanish versions of anything.
Okay, thank you.
And also, just to piggyback, the way the curriculum is developed lends itself well too, because it kind of starts with the self, the individual, and it kind of works its sphere of influences out to the community, to the state, and to the country. So again, in the primary grades, in the earlier grades, it allows for more individual look at how does, and so those can be the ties that we look at, how to incorporate Spanish.
Okay.
I don't
Makes
know.
sense.
I think tonight, when I look at one of our Spanish teachers that we're recommending, is somebody that we feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to have them join us. It's an individual that started a Spanish program in the Oregon School District. She was one of 3 Spanish teachers that developed and wrote the curriculum for the Oregon program, which has been highly successful. And she happens to be moving to the area. It's just one of those, uncanny coincidences that works to our advantage. She's a very talented young lady with lots of background and experience that will be very beneficial to us as we look at that curriculum development.
Thanks.
I think you had your hand up next, Ms. Newfield.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was very detailed and appreciated. I had 2 questions, and you answered them. One of which is, how quickly can you turn this around for next fall, seeing we've only had a couple weeks left of the school year, and you're able to do that? And the second was, how do you transition from level to level, which it seems this program is building on that, and you have a new student coming in. And Jean seemed to address that question as well, where students can arrive at this curriculum and still achieve those benchmarks that we're setting for them. So, so thank you for the very detailed presentation. It was much appreciated.
Further? Mr. Croner?
I just have one question, but first, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. It looks like a well-researched, well-thought-out program, and it looks like the kids are going to like it. One thing that's missing for me that I ask when I hear presentations like this is, how are you going to measure that it's being implemented appropriately? Will you get periodic reports during the first year or second year that so many classrooms are implementing it and it's going well or not going well? How do you measure that sort of thing?
I think that was part of like our committee staying together and getting together like in the fall, a couple times during the year, so that we can do some checkpoints as to how it's going in a building. That so that was part of why that was built into the implementation plan. So that's kind of like, how's it going? Are people able to do this? I think those people that have looked at it, the teachers that have used some of the resources just find it, I think people are so excited. There's a high level of excitement about this. So I think we're going to have people diving in with a lot of enthusiasm. But having said that we get together to talk about what's going well, what's not, are the assessments working, what assessments do we think we should require, what assessments are optional, trying to delineate some of those kinds of things as we move through it. We can't teach all the lessons. That's why some of the work this summer will be to make some decisions about, are there some things that are essential versus things that, might not be, so that we can best monitor that way. It'll be easy enough for our principals to also be able to monitor the implementation. It is an engaging curriculum. If students are not engaged in doing this, if they're sitting in their seats learning social studies, then we know this isn't being implemented with the integrity that's expected. Because I think probably one of the most unique things about it is it's interactive, and it's connecting students on that emotional level, on those personal levels, so that you can't get that if they're sitting in their seats. So it's visibly something that you should be able to see. Very noticeable things. Not all the activities are indoors. Some of them are outdoors. Some of them are, they have things like tug of wars that help to teach concepts. So it's a very engaging, interactive curriculum that shouldn't be happening in the seats.
Principals then will, as they walk around the classrooms, monitor implementation and then interact with the committee?
Yep. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
perfect.
In fact, they'll probably be interacting even on just the level of how's it going. We still do that with our treasures implementation with our principals. We are always asking them. They've looked at some of the weekly assessment data to monitor implementation. They have, we've done walkthroughs, so we do some of those kind of things to see overall what's it look like, our implementation, how's it going. So
Okay.
we have different ways of getting at that through the administrative part of it.
All right, thank you.
Further comment, please? Who made up the committee? From what areas did you draw from? I'm not real clear on that. And I have a particular question did you engage any of our former Spanish teachers that retired? We retired some very, very fine individuals, and I just wondered if they were a part of it.
They were not part of the Social Studies Committee. These are the members of the Social Studies Committee. So our Spanish teachers our Spanish and our French and German teachers have been working all year in their own committee. And our very talented teachers that we have right now presently employed with us have been working very closely. They were on the committee for hiring the elementary Spanish teachers. So we included our present employees for that. And I think we have some really well-qualified people to do that work right now. So we didn't engage any retired individuals, but that didn't seem necessary given, I think we have a strong talent pool in our current positions, so.
And when you talked about researching Wauwatosa, how are you going to do that?
Teachers right now
researching the
have, we cleaned up a lot of things were being taught in our present social studies curriculum that were not aligned to state or national standards. So we might have been teaching Japan in, I don't know what grade that was, but that's third grade. And that's not part of the third grade standards. So we cleaned up some of those kind of things and also recognized that this is teaching in context. So for third grade, for Wauwatosa, what we'll do is we will teach the community and the concept of how we are in relation to the community, and then supplement that by talking about it specifically to the Wauwatosa community. And there's a lot of resources that teachers presently use related to Wauwatosa. So we'll this summer, we'll take a look at what's presently used. Are there some things online that we haven't been using? And we'll put together a supplement for teachers on specifically the community of Wauwatosa.
Do you use or go to the Wauwatosa Historical Society for any help, any research?
They do. This traditionally, second grade has taught Wauwatosa, and so they'll continue to do so. Their topic is our community through TCI, and they have a lot of resources in place. So like Beth was saying, they're going to go through, they've developed booklets. There was a CD that I think might have come from the Wauwatosa Historical Society, I believe, and they'll look at that. And in talking with them as we wrote the benchmarks, they felt they had enough resources in place already that they would be able to draw from. Because where they would spend a whole year just about on Wauwatosa, now they're going to be paring that down and doing this TCI program, which will give our students a more global understanding of the concept of community, rather than just focusing on one community. So this is really broadening our students' understanding of that. And they'll be able to take the resources they already were using and pare those down to what is essential for our students to know about our community. It will kind of ground them in the overall concept.
It's
to localize
It's
it.
enriching further than one.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Is there community comment, please? Dr. Ertl, do you have anything to add to this?
No, just thank you for all the work that's been going on. I was able to sit through part of the presentation with Curriculum Council, and you can see by the excitement what a good program it's going to be.
Good. Thank you. We look forward to as it progresses.
Thank you.
We will move to superintendent's report, please.
Thank you. Tonight, we are bringing forward for discussion to the board an administrative recommendation on a memorandum of understanding with the WEA, as well as a completion of our current WESP contract. In particular with the WEA agreement, really, I think what we're looking at, if you had to term it in a way, would be a transition plan, really to get us to be able to bring forward a budget to the board by June 30th. And there's three key components to this agreement, and one is the pay freeze that people are currently will be paid next year, what they're being paid this year, half of the retirement contribution, as well as moving to a new health plan in the agreement to do so of a high deductible plan, a $1,200, $2,400, $1,200 single, $2,400 family plan. What this agreement brings to the district is some certainty, so we're able to budget. This agreement saves approximately $4 million, reduces the deficit $4 million with the WEA. And I think there's some points to be made about getting to this point with the teachers. And I think this dates back to when the first budget bill, or Act 10, was introduced, and I think it's an issue of a lot of choices. You can argue and say, you know, the teachers really didn't have a choice but to say, sure, go ahead, because the budget bill is coming down. But the fact remains, they did have a choice. And I think the teachers have made some really good choices dating back to when this first came out, and the fact that we never did cancel school because they chose to be in the classrooms. And all along, there's been good decisions made by our teachers, and I think their professionalism has shown through. And in our discussions on this agreement, my perceptions were very clear that this was done and agreed to because we know the tough spot we're in. And when you agree to something that is difficult personally for everybody involved, that's a real challenge. And I think this agreement is the best we can do at this point in time. And like I said, it's a transition plan. We know there's a whole lot of work to be done, moving into a different type of bargaining, a different type of relationship with our teachers, with the school board and how the school board operates. I know the board is going to have some real tough decisions to wrestle with, whether it's the handbook and policies that go in place that guide the handbook is where the board is going to have to do a lot of the work this summer. And I think this is, we know it's not perfect. We know there's people that have been on the schedule, and we redid the schedule, that have been in tough places. But I don't know that we were targeting trying to get perfect. We're targeting trying to get the best we can in a really, really difficult situation. And so this is what we're bringing forward. And I think Dan can share a little bit more on specifics, and then we can answer questions or provide any information that you would like.
I think Dr. Ertl probably said most of what needed to be said, but I suppose just to remind everyone of the essential elements of each agreement. The WEA collective bargaining agreement is currently set to expire June 30th of this year. And at this point, Act 10 is not, is still held up by court actions in Madison. And so we're at a point now where we're attempting to staff our buildings and finalize our budget, where the implementation and the timing of that act is not a certainty. And under those conditions, the WEA agreed really to what is an interim agreement in which neither side is sacrificing their ultimate authority or their rights to bargain. Both sides are waiting until there's a final decision about Act 10, but we've reached agreement about the essential financials that are necessary for us to staff the buildings and to reach a budget. Specifically, that was the pay freeze identified by Dr. Ertl in terms of lanes and steps. That teachers would begin paying the WRS contributions, their one half of their WRS, which is really the amount identified in Act 10, that we would be switching to a high deductible health plan as a way to capture the costs that Act 10 envisions a district saving, along with some minor and corresponding changes to our cash in lieu of benefit, a reduction in that amount to reflect the fact that our health plan is now a less expensive health plan. In exchange for that, one of the guarantees that we're making is that we maintain our current post-retirement benefits through the next school year. And that also provides the school board with time to really consider what type of policy it would put in place. It's really a benefit to both sides. There is a small amount of money, a total of $36,000, to recognize the investment of those staff members who've invested in taking courses, taking coursework, obtaining master's degrees, who were really investing those dollars under an assumption that the salary schedule would be in place as it has been in the past. And it won't be an add to their base salary, but will really be a one-time stipend to recognize that investment by those staff members. And that really summarized the WEA agreement. I don't know if you want to ask questions on this one at this time and then talk about the WESP agreement separately, or if you prefer that I just...
Let's do just work with this first presentation, the WEA part.
Sure.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions, please? Yeah. Mr. Meyer?
Just a comment. I do not support this understanding because of Clause 1. The current salary grid we cannot afford to maintain going forward, and this locks us into that grid for one-year contracts. So all of the teachers will be locked in for a year at these salaries, regardless of what happens with Act 10. So the Clause 1 in my mind defeats the purpose of the memorandum because it does more than sustain us until Act 10 passes. It locks this item in for the entire year, and it's an item that's not sustainable over the long run.
Is there further comment, please? Mrs. Randall?
Could you expand a little bit, Mike, to help me understand it? Supposedly, if this Act 10 goes into effect, we can bargain for a 1.5% salary increase, is that correct?
Are you asking, well, Clause 9.
I'm asking you to explain it
Just
because-
as I'm reading it, Clause 9 says that if Act 10 passes, that, quote, bargaining may commence regarding other terms and conditions of a successor agreement which are not covered by this memorandum. I read that to mean that terms 1 through 8 cannot be reopened. So the salary grid, which it basically gives everybody the same grade they had last year with respect to the teacher pay. There's no rationale for changing anyone's salary. It in broad senses, maxes out on our ability to pay teacher salaries, and it locks us in at this maxed out place for the entire year. And I understand that we're working very hard to come up with a compensation paradigm, a compensation structure that relates to our educational goals, and that will be coming later this summer, perhaps early fall. But I'm not content to wait an entire year. I guess I'm just tired of losing time. I'm getting old. I don't want to wait years for things to happen anymore. So I know much good work has been done on this, and it is just stunning what has been done. And unfortunately, it's not about, for my opinion, what I want. It's what I think we have money to pay for.
It's, so I understand this. The current contract expires June 30th.
That's correct.
If we do nothing, then step and lane increases would be implemented in the fall under that expired contract, right? And I'm saying if nothing happens in Madison.
That's really part of the problem. If over the next 3 weeks, if we were to not adopt this agreement and we still were uncertain come June 1st as to the status of Act 10, we would really need to do precautionary layoffs of a large number of our teaching staff in order to ensure that we have the flexibility come the fall. Assuming that Act 10 would pass over the summer, that would not necessarily be, it'd be something that we could then have the tools, as it's so often said, to deal with. But in the meantime, there's a substantial risk that some of our very talented teachers might end up going to other districts. And there are certainly other districts that have had a large number of retirements who are looking to hire. And so we would really be putting an asset at risk to do that. And then the fear being, if the budget bill is not passed by September, I think we still have an obligation under our current contract, which is the status quo, to then provide step increases and lane movement. And so we would be risking more money in order to hold our breath and rely on a court action that's not done yet. And I believe that this agreement puts control of our destinies in our own hands versus decisions that are being made elsewhere.
Well, that, I guess, is my primary concern through all of this, all this information we've been getting and all the things we've been working on. I still have yet to find any tools, number one. Local control is gone, number two. But I really would like us, to the extent that we can, keep control of this, because clearly the information coming from the governor is inaccurate as far as amounts and things go, and that's been reported. And that I'm also going to say is why I have a concern about having an experienced treasurer on the board, because we're going to be operating very differently, and we're going to have to really know what we're doing. So, and I'm thinking that what Mr. Meyer is talking about is the same thing, but in a different scenario. This idea of, taking any action based on the whims of people outside that don't understand the current funding formulas, so obviously can't, come up with accurate numbers. I don't know what to say. I guess my goal would be, again, if you truly believe that approving these gives us as much opportunity as possible to keep providing the level of education that we can to our kids, and frankly to restore some of the respect to our teachers that's been publicly taken away, that I would see those as the reasons to approve it.
And I think, I guess I'll respond to that because I think it does do some of that to some degree. I don't think, taking away 6% of teacher salary brings them respect, but I think there's a solid understanding that they know the position we're in. We've got a couple things playing against us. We have the budget that's coming down with a huge impact, and when you hear Mrs. Ehrenberger talking about the social studies work, and you come to our building leadership team and see the work our teachers continue to do, and I think they're the ones that are going to make sure the education keeps going, and I think that's a critical component that we need to keep in mind. And I agree with Mr. Meyer that we need to find a way, and every building I've gone to and said, the structure we have, the pay scale, the pay grade that we have isn't the best way to pay teachers based upon district goals and where we're trying to go, and trying to come up with something new that can recognize that in a different way. And I think we need to do that. Current pay scale is not sustainable, but the recommendation we're bringing is just for this next year, and we know that we can't continue with it. Next year is a 0% levy increase according to the budget, yet we know costs continue to go up. So we're going to be dealing with some of this next year, not to the degree we are right now. But we need, what Mr. Chanin said about losing teachers, Waukesha's, I believe, hiring 100 teachers. We lay off, and we would have to lay off over 100 teachers if we don't take some steps. And if I'm a laid-off teacher and I can have an opportunity to go to Waukesha and have a contract, there's just some people, and we know there's a lot of teachers out there, but there's a reason we hired the teachers that we have, and we don't want to lose them to the best of our ability.
Mr. Meyer?
Well, there will be no more money next year than what there will be this year. There'll be some, but not enough to really matter. So we'll have the same question before us next year. We'll either have to structure so that we pay some people less money. I don't know who that would be. Or we'll have to lay off teachers. And we'll have to come up with some staffing compensation mechanism that accomplishes those ends. So the idea that, if we don't do this, we'll have to lay off teachers, well, doesn't change. 12 months from now, same tough decisions. We'll have to lay off teachers. Or some people are going to need to be paid less so that we can pay some other people more according to whatever rational structure is put into place. My only quarrel is that the idea that we are waiting a year when the decision we will face 12 months from now is essentially the same decision we would face now, and we haven't tried now. We haven't asked the union to reopen the grid. The idea would be that they wouldn't agree anyway. Well, that's exactly the problem that's been claimed by some circles to be the problem with unions, that they won't work with you when you're out of money. And so I don't agree, but we haven't tried. So, I know that there's not time to do anything in the next couple months. But by the same token, waiting a year seems to me to be too long. And there's nothing in here that allows us to reopen in mid-year if Act 10 passes. So I'm not meaning to be critical of the good work that's been done. All I'm saying is that same tough problem will happen 12 months from now. Let's get started. If we can fix it before then, let's do it. That's all I'm saying. And rational, reasonable people could vote for this. I only mean to sound the cry that don't have false hope if we pass this. A year from now, it's going to be bad. And I don't see any way around that. I could be wrong, but that's why I'm taking the position. If it's 6-1 and I'm the one, at least we've put out the warning that there's some reasonable people who think that next year is going to be really bad, and in some way. That's all I have to say.
Mr. Croner?
Mr. Meyer, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you suggesting that there should be, the amount we spend on salaries next year should be less than this year, or just that we should reopen the grid and re-examine that?
That we should reopen the grid. I mean, we could start counting exact dollars, and there's probably going to be some more money next year, but not a real lot, And so if we have all these teachers who are frozen on this grid, well, there's all kinds of reasons why various people, according to our theory of compensation, why some people would earn more money and some people would earn less money. And we're only putting off the inevitable. And I know we can't do anything this moment, but I'm not content with 12 months as well. And so if individual teachers need one-year contracts, I understand, but there's no escape clause on the pay, on the dollar amount of the pay. So again, it's only because I'm more of a pessimistic person, so to speak, that let's just take our bad medicine now and move on, or do it sooner. So it's the idea that everybody gets the same, essentially, if we were giving grades, all the teachers get the same grade that they got last year, no matter what they did, no matter what they accomplished, good or bad, we're paying them the same. And we're going to do that for a whole year. And it's not going to get us further down the road in the direction that we want to go. So I'm starting to be repetitive here, so I should stop.
It's just one more comment.
Yes, please.
Mr. Cheney, correct me if I summarize this wrong, but the way I've understood this is that we're negotiating a potential pay freeze for next year, but that without this agreement, no matter what happens, whether Act 10 passes or the situation continues as it is now and we have to bargain another full agreement, salaries will go up starting next year, either under Act 10 or under normal bargaining.
I think the problem of waiting for Act 10, we'll start with the simple scenario. If Act 10 doesn't pass, then yes, we would be in the position where the status quo is lanes and step increases, and we would be bargaining over that contract. And yes, that could be bargaining a give back on that agreement. If Act 10 passes, there's still an obligation to bargain up to potentially the rate of consumer price index. This is an agreement to kind of forestall that bargaining so that we have a set budget now.
So that was my main point, that this agreement sets salaries flat for next year with no increase. If we don't take action, there will be an increase of some kind through bargaining, either under conditions set by Act 10 or under the current conditions. So I think that it is it is helpful for the district to keep salaries flat so that future increases will be based on this year's salary amount.
Excuse me, did you want to say something? No. Okay. Ann?
Thank you. First, I'd like to commend the administration and the teachers for discussing this in a rational and mature manner in the best interest of the district. There's a lot of hysteria and lots of words flying around in all different directions, and I think that both parties here have dealt with this, always focusing on what's best for the district. So thank you to both sides for that. I would say that I agree with the idea that the grid is in the long run not sustainable. But I think, I do support the memorandum of understanding because it saves the district $4 million without affecting what goes on in the classroom, without affecting the students. And if we do not do anything, there will be an effect on the students in the classrooms. There are some phenomenal changes in here which are good for our district from a financial standpoint. And none of them affect the kids. They affect the adults. And so while I, in a perfect world, would like Clause 1 to be different, I think that this is a good way to begin that process. And it gives both sides time to figure out what that pay scale, the schedule, whatever you want to call it, what that is going to look like. I don't think that's something that we can snap our fingers and do in a very short period of time. So this is a way for the district to save money in a way that does not affect the kids and moves us down the path towards changing that unsustainable structure. So it's not perfect. Would I change a few things? Of course, probably. But I think that this is a very good first step, and at this point I do support this. I'm listening to everyone else as we proceed, but my position in reading it is one of support. So thank you again to both sides.
Mrs. Randall, did you have something more?
I just want to clarify Mr. Chainan's last response, that if we do nothing, that we definitely will be paying higher salaries in the fall, no matter what happens. That was what you said.
I don't think that's quite what I said. I think that we would have an obligation to continue bargaining, and I think you could be bargaining a decrease. I think where the parties ended up was to bargain a flat amount. We basically, however, if Act 10 doesn't pass, there is a status quo obligation to grant steps and lanes. So you would start the year with people's salaries increasing.
Right, but if it doesn't pass, it's not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be paying.
No, if it
does pass, I'm sorry.
If it does pass, there's certain savings in here that I think would be captured immediately. So, for example, the WRS and the ability to unilaterally implement the insurance change. However, there's still an obligation to bargain total base wages. And part of the difficulty here is that it will probably be some time before the regulatory agencies tell us what it means to bargain total base wages. And I would just point out that the last time that there was a major statutory change in bargaining law with the implementation of the qualified economic offer, it was quite some time before the appropriate state agencies did come out with the regulations that defined how to cost that. And so it is very likely that those districts and unions that move quickly to bargain total base wages may find out that they bargained in error based on erroneous calculations of what that means. And that is what happened to several districts that rushed through and implemented QEOs after that law was passed as well.
Do you have your questions?
Oh, I got a million more, but, and I'm really interested in picking Mr. Meyer's brain a little bit more, but.
No, you got all I have. That's it.
Okay. All right.
I'd like to say something then.
Yeah,
if
go
you have
ahead,
anything.
please.
I don't know when we've faced a more difficult subject. There are so many unknowns. But the most exciting part for me is that we are working together to serve the children of this district the very best. I don't hear individuals touting, if I can use that word, for themselves. The board certainly is working with the administration, who have given many, many hours on this. And I truly believe that we are putting forth the very best we can. And hopefully, by fall, there will be some answers, but we don't know that we will. So I need to say thank you to the WEA and to administration for all the work that's gone on. And I know the board, each member, and I respect every single opinion, have worked and considered this, but I think this is the very best we have at this point. Yes, Dr. Ertl?
I'm going to take one more shot to, with Mr. Meyer's analogy. Using the analogy of a grade, I think, is a good way to look at what we're trying to accomplish with the pay scale and how we're going to work through it. And I think that if we were to put something in place right now, what we're doing is, to use a classroom analogy, we're going through a semester of class or a year-long class, and at the end of the class, we're saying, here's your grade, and here's what it was based on, without telling the students what their grade was going to be based on. What we want to be able to do is, if we're going to do something and base the salary and compensation on something, we want to make sure that the rubric's out in front, that people know what they're going to be paid on, and they have time and they can respond to it in a timely manner. So for timeline purposes, we hope that we can get through and have, not we hope, we plan to get something in place before the school year starts for the following year. So if people are going to be compensated differently, they're going to know exactly what they need to do during this next school year to get themselves compensated in the way that they can and they want to. So if there's different, if there's different leadership roles, if they can be involved in leadership roles and that has an impact on salary or compensation, they can make that decision knowing full well that there's some compensation involved in it. Or if we go the route of some kind of performance indicators, that they know exactly what those would be. So we're not just, they know what they're being graded on, in other words.
Okay. Let's move on to the next part, please.
We're bringing forward a parallel recommendation for the Wauwatosa Education Support Professionals. This association is in a slightly different, I should back up and say this association represents our educational assistants. They're in a slightly different place than our other collective bargaining units, and they're currently in a contract hiatus. And we were in the process of bargaining a contract which would have covered the 2009 and forward, 2009-10 and forward school years. What we are recommending is similar in that it requires that this unit starts paying its WRS contribution in the amount of 1/2 of that total starting July 1st, 2010. That they would also participate in our high deductible health plan with an HSA when our health insurance contracts renew in October.
Excuse me, when you say the
They being
initials, what do you mean?
WESP.
Say that,
The WESP,
what group?
the
They're
educational
not-
assistants,
Thank you.
yes, that they would also participate in the high deductible plan. And that this would take effect in October when the plan date renews. One thing that is different is that this is the only group that for the current school year did not have a pay raise, and we are recommending that they do receive a 1.5% pay increase for the current school year prior to having their salary and step frozen for the coming school year. And I would note that for the current school year, they've already received their step, because getting that step is a part of the dynamic status quo obligation. So this would just simply be a 1.5% increase.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, board members? Yes, Mrs. Fee.
First, a point of clarification. I believe you said that they would start paying their WRS as of July 1st of 2010. It would actually be this year, wouldn't it?
Correct, July 1st, 2011, correct.
And then secondly, do you have a dollar amount for the 1.5% increase?
I do not, I believe it was under 40,000.
Thank you.
And if you were to look at the, I do know that for the projected savings for both the step and wage increase for next year is 63,000, and the 1.5% is a pay raise is only a portion of that part of that step. So I believe the 1.5% is under 45. If Mr. Mack remembers that number.
Thank you.
Okay. Further comment or question? Mr. Meyer, you are
Sure.
ready to say something.
Thank you. I support this. That said, I don't know that it is inconsistent with my other position. I support it because the magnitude is much smaller, so it won't have so big of an impact on us. These are folks who probably were due some increase. Is that thinking? In the big scheme of things, there's reasons why you're recommending what you're recommending.
And they would be the only employee group that would not have received a raise this year and would be therefore frozen for 2 years. Even those employees who are on the teacher pay scale who were frozen for the 2 years of the contract began that process with a actual dollar raise, even if it was less than expected.
Okay. And if anyone sees any inconsistency with my other position, I would appreciate hearing the reasoning, because that's sort of why I'm scrunch-faced, as I'm trying to think whether there is an inconsistency, and there could very well be one, but I can't identify it. Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Mufeld.
Thank you. Mr. Chanin, I would like to clarify item 5.
Yes.
And this is related to the WESP not having a premium contribution to their healthcare percent, or the health premium percent.
Of sorts.
Contribution, yes,
Yep.
sorry.
Currently, the members of the WESP only receive a single premium. So if they pay family, which many of them do, they're paying approximately, well, more than half of the cost of the health insurance, which right now is about $1,700 a month, and they're receiving about $795 a month. So we're paying just under $1,000 a month for family coverage. So we're not changing their premium share, but I guess I would point out that their premium share, should they choose a family plan, is more than 50%.
Okay, just to make sure that we're only going to pay equal to the single premium, and that the employee would then pay above that for family.
Correct.
Okay.
Substantially above that.
Okay, thank you.
Further comment or question? Yes, Mrs. Randall.
This is not a suggestion, but they've always had that different medical plan or whatever. And we always talk about everybody having, the same plan. And why don't we do that with them?
Obviously, when in the historical part of having different bargaining units, you're always bargaining up from a base number. It would be quite a substantial increase to simply pay that amount per employee. I believe that arbitration, that was an included item when they arbitrated one of their prior contracts. And a neutral third-party arbitrator found that to be an unreasonable request. Basically, it's the amount that you're increasing the budget. If we were to consider extending that benefit to them, I think we would basically have to create a substantially higher premium share for everyone. And I think that that's something that's going to take some long-term discussion by the board once Act 10 passes about how you want to structure your benefits package. And I think that will probably be a point of the discussion.
Okay. And that brings up another question, if I may.
Okay?
And maybe you're going to talk about this in your budget report about the other 2 units. We were given some figures, what the high deductible plan would save from the Hayes Company representatives. And was that based on all 4 bargaining units, those savings?
Yes, and retirees, early retirees.
So,
But the savings would not change. For example, if we don't get the savings from those 2 other groups, the amount of savings that we're getting from switching administration, non-rep, WEA, WESP would remain the same, what we know. So by having 2 other groups would not impact the savings.
so the premium isn't based on how many people are participating?
No, we project the savings for each group kind of by proportioning the amount. So no, we would basically be maintaining 2 separate plans.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
any other? Okay, then, Dr. Earl, do you want to do the budget update, please? Thank you.
I think a large part of the budget we just discussed, and where we're trying to get, obviously the WA has the largest impact on our budget planning and our staffing. I think the key component is we're continuing to get close to being able to finalize a staffing plan that we can bring to the board, and there's going to be some reductions in some areas. The elementary and a couple of JK, Eisenhower, for example, is going down 1 section because the large 5th grade is going off. And so some of the enrollments are changing like they do every single year, so we'll have some shifts and some minor reductions. In teaching staff, we staffed tighter at the secondary level at a +1, knowing that with, if you want to call it staffing creep, how each year it's different staffs added, we're counting budgetarily on a +0.5. Some actual good news that our January count this previous year is up 90 students from last year's January count. So we continue to, in particular at the elementary level, our resident enrollment is growing. There's a lot still that's going to change before the end of June when the budget needs to be adopted. We go through and have discussions about it, probably daily. We're projecting at this point somewhere around a 0% levy increase. We're not completely sure what the aid will be, but we're projecting a flat levy with no increase as well. So with that reduction of $6.5 million, we're still looking at a flat levy somewhere in that neighborhood. So we'll continue to move forward, and hopefully at the second board meeting, or the first board meeting in June at the latest, that we'll have a presentation pending the outcome of some of these decisions that need to be made, and then have it voted on. I believe it's the 27th, which is the last board meeting in June. So we're continuing down the path, and we will have a budget brought to the board, a balanced budget for the board to respond to and ultimately take action.
Will we see the budget, please?
The first meeting in June, which I believe is the 13th.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments, please? You were complete, right, with your...
It is the
report?
13th.
Okay. Excuse me, you were finished with it. Okay, Mary Jo?
Okay, and did you mention there will be a freeze of administrative and non-represented?
Yeah, the same 3 components will go in place for administration and non-represented people as well.
I didn't think you said that, right? But people know that?
Correct.
Okay.
I apologize. I did not ask for community comment on the two subjects previous, so is there anyone who wishes to speak to Mr. Chanin's report with respect to WEA and WESP? Yes, please. Would you step to the microphone, please, and give your name?
One real quick question. How many people are represented in? It's just over 100.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Debbie Brent, WEA President. I'd like to thank you for your comments, including yours, Mr. Meyer. The key word here for us, as we sat at the table many times attempting to get at what we got at and what you see before you, was so that we could at least next year deliver the same kind of educational quality that we have come to know and want to provide for the students that belong in TOSA. By no means are we naive enough to think that going forward things are going to have to change. Hopefully, over the course of the last 3 to 4 years, we have laid a groundwork of communication and an ability to have the hard discussions, make the hard decisions, and move this forward. The key with this, and I think I kept saying all along, transition. We need to breathe. There's too many unknowns. There's hysteria. I think Mrs. Fee talked about that earlier. Some semblance of normal, whatever that really is, needs to occur to allow us to do the kind of good work that we need to do going forward. And hopefully that will continue. Again, we totally understand that this year is going to be nothing like next year. We know there's more shoes that are going to drop. We understand that the budget is not going to get prettier, if anything, uglier. But it allows us to breathe, to go up about the business of providing the education for the students in TOSA, at the same time attempting to get at the things that we need to get at so that we can continue to move forward. So I thank you all for your consideration and just a few comments on how we got there and hopefully where we intend to go. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Now, is there anything on the budget update? Seeing none, is there any further comment from the community on any other subject, please? Board members, any further questions or comment? If not, we will adjourn this portion of the meeting to move into executive session pursuant to State Statute 19.85 subsection 1 subsection E to discuss the status of the negotiations with its collective bargaining units, to discuss a request for tuition reimbursement of an administrator, which will include discussions of compensation and/or performance evaluation data of a specific employee, and I would entertain a motion to that.
So moved.
Mrs. B?
Second.
A second?
Second?
Thank you, Mary Jo. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. Giroux?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes. We will take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 10 minutes to 9. Thank you.
I need to get a picture.